All right, hello and welcome to the Big Three from the Coalition for a Prosperous America, where each week we break down the three biggest stories shaping U.S. trade, industrial policy, and the American economy. I'm Mihir Torsekar, and alongside me is my fellow senior economist and co-host, Andrew Rechenberg. So let's get to it. Today we have two special guests, and they are here to talk about the big three issues raised in a report that CPA recently released alongside the Responsible Battery Coalition. The report is called Wartime Footing, and how the United States can reverse China's dominance of the battery minerals processing. Our guests today are two distinguished public servants who have dedicated their careers to American national security. First is Major General Bill Crane, U.S. Army retired, who formerly served as the commanding general of West Virginia, and has worked directly with Taiwanese forces on irregular warfare preparedness. He currently serves on the Responsible Battery Coalition's board. And we're also joined by Rear Admiral Peter Brown, U.S. Coast Guard retired. He's the vice chair of the RBC's Critical Minerals Leadership Roundtable and brings decades of experience in maritime strategy and defense infrastructure. Gentlemen, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. But before we get started with the show, I just wanted to see if there was anything you guys wanted to add about either your background or what you do at the Responsible Battery Coalition. You're welcome to speak on any of those issues.
Yeah, so Mayor, I'll go ahead and start. So, it was great to link up with the Responsible Battery Coalition. I've always been in the critical infrastructure space, particularly because of being the commanding general of the National Guard. My focus has always been what my governor needed to help the citizens of West Virginia. And so we always wanted to ensure that we did the right thing to ensure that our population's daily lives were least impact as possible to them. And so getting into the battery coalition and their understanding of the critical minerals, the rare earth elements, really helps. I can come behind them and go, yeah, I can really support this because I know what it takes to make sure our critical infrastructure is maintained and to keep the lives of our American citizens, in particular West Virginians, right where we need them to be. We don't want them to see a big change. Just like we haven't seen since the Iran conflict has started. So I think that's a great thing that, the everyday citizen, yes, they know that we're over there, we're doing things, but daily life for them has not significantly changed other than gas prices, some areas where the inflation stuff may have hit them a little bit. But overall, this has been a great opportunity to see what we can do.
Great. Admiral Brown, is there anything you'd like to add? Or
Yes, so thank you, Mihir, and thanks to CPA for hosting, both for writing the report and for hosting this event. As you mentioned, at the Responsible Battery Coalition and our Critical Minerals Roundtable, we're really looking at the national security implications of the supply chain cycle for batteries, particularly lead-acid batteries. We'll talk a little bit more about why that battery technology is so important. But the one thing I wanted to add comes from my time in the Coast Guard. A lot of it was tactical, on the water, stopping bad guys kind of stuff. And then as I moved higher in the organization and within the Department of Homeland Security, looked very closely at Homeland Security. But then I had an amazing opportunity to work in the first Trump administration as a Deputy Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs, specifically as the President's Homeland Security Advisor. And in that vein, I got to meet people and learn about the interconnection between national security and our economy. And I'll point out that in this Trump administration, the second Trump administration in particular, the national security implications of our commercial, economic, and trade relationships around the world are elevated to the same level as the diplomatic and the military, in which military folks like me have been acquainted. So this connection now to commerce, economy, and trade opens a lot of people's eyes to what's going on. And I think Bill mentioned irregular warfare, and we are certainly in a stage of irregular warfare with an adversary who seeks to dominate us.
Fantastic. Well, I thought, for the first segment, I thought we would probably start by breaking down the three we'll start by breaking down the first, the big three items from the report that we talked about up front, starting with this issue of China's midstream chokehold and why processing is the battleground when it comes to lead acid battery manufacturing. But before we do that, I thought I wanted to turn it to you, gentlemen, to explain to the audience why lead acid batteries are so critical for not only for national security but for the economy in general.
Pete, you want to go ahead and take that one?
Well, I thought you were going to do that, and I was going to do maritime trade.
Okay. Well, I mean, the big thing, lead acid batteries are everywhere. It's in our agriculture. It's in our everyday cars. That technology is really critical to keep the economy running. And the nice thing is we generally have a really good stronghold on lead acid batteries. But again, if you let your guard down, you're gonna miss that opportunity to keep that dominant position. And so we've got to continue to work hard towards ensuring that we stay dominant in that arena. We got to make sure that we can sustain the antimony that's required in the lead acid battery chemistry. And again, and if that goes away and we don't do the recycling piece, which it's like a closed loop, nearly a closed loop that we have on lead acid battery, if we don't keep that dominance, then again, it'll be another industry that we could see go on to an adversary. And so we've got to keep that dominance.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because people often, when they hear about battery supply chain, they're often thinking about the lithium-ion batteries that tend to power electric vehicles or consumer electronics. But the lead-acid batteries are really the workhorse of the American economy. And so they start every truck and car on the road. They're backup power for hospitals, data centers, telecom networks, military installations. And this is a $30 billion domestic industry with manufacturing and recycling operations across 38 states, generates roughly $3 billion in tax revenue, supports thousands of jobs. And General Crane mentioned the recycling rate. Yes, the United States has a 99% lead recycling rate. So it's one of the most successful circular economies anywhere in manufacturing. So this isn't just a niche product. This is a really important, battery chemistry that underpins the infrastructure of this whole civilian economy. And so I guess to that point, we talk about, you mentioned antimony, General Crane, and why don't we talk a little bit about how, why antimony is such an important point of discussion in this supply chain and how it comes down to that. We've talked about how successful the lead acid battery supply chain is in America, and yet antimony, it all comes down to that. Why don't you talk a little bit about, why that's such a choke point in this discussion?
Yeah, because just again, it's a processing issue. We don't have the processing capacity, enough of it here in the United States for antimony. And it's not just for lead acid batteries, it's for our defense systems. And if we don't continue to maintain, I've heard it said before, would we let China build our F-35s? I don't think we would. But if you start going backwards from a finished F-35 and all it takes to build the F-35, why would you allow somebody else to control any part of the building of the F-35? So that's rare earth elements. That's critical minerals that are in those weapon systems. And so we've got to make sure we're bringing that processing back to the United States, because it truly is a national security issue for us if we allow an adversary to control that processing.
And you've had some firsthand experience witnessing what this looks like, with PPE equipment shortages during COVID. Could you talk a little bit about how maybe the mineral processing dependency compares to that experience and what it might tell us about the timeline for standing up domestic capacity when under pressure?
Yeah, I'm sure any of your viewers or listeners will remember the shortage of masks in our hospitals, the shortage of gowns, the shortage of gloves. And we saw that same thing here in West Virginia. We couldn't get those supplies. And so we made the decision to purchase equipment that we could run and manufacture our own masks and gloves and that kind of stuff. And but the other downside of that was it wasn't just the manufacture of those, but it was the manufacture of the machines that manufacture those were also coming from China. So, we have got to bring back the ability for us to build our own machines so that we can ensure that we can always produce what we need for the American population, especially when it comes to the national security area or even the safety and protection area. Not having that stuff, you know, we were so fortunate that we were able to go ahead and buy the equipment to produce those. I know we saved lives by doing that. And that's the way we've got to look at it, is how are we making sure that we're keeping the American people as safe as possible? And you do that through strength. You do that through manufacturing. You do that through a strong economy. You don't have a strong national defense without a strong economy.
Yeah, this is part of the reason why it was so much fun working with RBC as well, because CPA were very much aligned on those very issues. Admiral Brown, if you could talk a little bit about, China's influence extends beyond just mineral processing into ports and shipping and logistics, infrastructure globally. So how do these layers of control interact, and how does that compound the midstream vulnerability that we've identified in this report?
Wow, that's a great question, and the part that I find the most interesting and compelling about this is that this is a problem that, in a slightly different context, Alexander Hamilton foresaw at the founding of our country. And in Federalist 11 and 12, he talks about the need for the United States to become not a raw materials country, but a manufacturing and processing and commerce country. Because if we sold raw materials to our economic adversary, at the time the powers of Europe, to allow them to manufacture and add value and then sell back to us at prices of their choosing, that we were vulnerable both economically and from a security standpoint. And exactly those same points apply now in critical minerals and in maritime commerce. And so we'll stick for the moment with the critical minerals part of it. We have a scenario where the United States, Canada, and other friendshore nearby countries have substantial ores and raw materials for critical minerals of all kinds. But as the Trump administration, particularly Secretary Rubio, points out in the National Security Strategy and some Department of State documents, in their terms, the global elites, including Americans, made misguided bets on the benefits of global free trade and hollowed out our industry at home and placed vulnerability in the hands of our adversary for them to employ at a time of their choosing. And on antimony specifically, the government of China turned off the flow for a relatively short period of time, but spiked global prices and tanked global production at the same time. And so in addition to the processing facilities having been economically captured by China, either directly in mainland China or in countries now friendlier to them than they are to us, China controls a lot of global transportation, shipping and shipbuilding, as well as port facilities in a number of countries, including most recently in Panama and Peru and other places, so that if raw material has to move from the United States or Canada or Jamaica or Guyana or Bolivia to some other place, specifically in Asia, and then come back in the form of manufactured products, China holds kind of veto power over those transactions and transportation at the port and shipping company levels, in addition to the processing facilities. So there are a number of points of vulnerability that we have through economic negligence placed in the hands of our adversary.
Yeah, and I think, when we're talking about the ports issue, when it comes to China, they always cloak their civilian, the civilian applications are always, there's a confusion between civilian and military, the conflation of the two items, I guess you could say, the military-civil fusion, that makes anything that they do kind of, cast suspicion on what their real intentions are. You mentioned the port in Peru, the Chonque port in Peru that they just, I think, announced in November, if I'm not mistaken, or October of last year, perhaps.
Right, and that
megaport.
Yeah, and that a court in Peru has said that the government of Peru has no ability to regulate and monitor what's going on inside the captive Chinese corporation that's running that port. So what I tell folks is, when it comes to the government of China or Chinese affiliated companies, When they say investment, you need to hear infiltration. When they say employment, we need to hear espionage. And when they say company or commerce, we need to hear communism, because that's what they're exporting to the Western Hemisphere when we interact with them as if they were global peers.
Yeah, a megaport in the Western Hemisphere that has potentially the opportunity to like serve military purposes for China, at the same time extracting natural resources from Latin America, where they have a wellspring of critical minerals, is obviously something we should be keeping an eye on. And I think that this really transitions well into the second segment of our discussion today, which is talking about like the national security implication, readiness, surge capacity, and the Defense Logistics Agency, the DLA gap. So we talked about some of the critical minerals that are implicated in battery production. For antimony, the DLA ceiling that we have, we are well short of being able. I mean, we are not anywhere near self-sufficient. In fact, I don't think we have any refining or mining capabilities on that front. So I think you mentioned. I think we heard a little bit earlier about how China has already sort of weaponized their dominance of these supply chains, and they kind of cut us off. And had a direct impact on antimony prices and the availability of that critical mineral. Can we talk a little bit about, Admiral Brown, maybe you can talk a little bit from a naval standpoint and the, Pacific contingency planning. How important is domestic refining capacity to sustaining operations beyond the initial phase of conflict?
Well, the great lesson here is World War II, because from a capability standpoint, Germany in particular was as capable in terms of technology and manufacture as the United States, and Japan very nearly so. But where the United States had the advantage was in sheer capacity. We could just outproduce numerically in a large scale the things that were needed to prosecute the war. And that's how Germany and Japan were defeated in World War II. Right now, as we're seeing certainly in the conflict in Iran, the U.S. has a technically superior edge over the forces that we're currently combating. With Communist China, that edge would be much smaller, in large part due to their industrial espionage, but also that technological superiority in the current environment is something of a veneer, because underneath it is very limited capacity, and some of the capacity is actually, again, controlled by our adversary. And so the ability to regenerate and do so quickly stockpiles of critical munitions and even mundane things like starter batteries for vessels, vehicles, and for uninterrupted power supplies and other things that can keep our weapon systems and vehicles and aircraft doing what they need to do. The capability to regenerate capacity has been, again, with these misguided bets on global free trade, offshore. I often tell folks that one of the things that the Trump administration did a very good job with was highlighting the very visible migration of people from low wage, low security, and low regulation environments to higher wages and higher security. At the same time, over the past couple of decades, capital and manufacturing capacity migrated in the opposite direction, from high regulation, high wage, and high tax, frankly, Western democracies of North America and Western Europe toward Asia and Africa. And in doing so, we've lost the ability to control the regeneration of our military capacity. That's where the great vulnerability is.
Yeah, and I'm thinking too about when we talk about vulnerability, General Crane, if you could talk a little bit about one of the things we talk about in the report is this gray zone. Beijing's really operating in this gray zone and influencing, kind of coercing through that area, that gray zone. Can you talk a little bit about how that works, what that is in this context?
Yes. So what I would say, I'll start off going back to something Admiral Brown talked about. So even at our ports, the cranes that are at the ports that are offloading supplies, they came from China. And in those were communication devices. And so as he talks about, everything they send here is a sensor. It's a way for them to get information and gain an edge of knowing what it is we're trying to do. And so, we continue to have that issue that we allow their stuff to come here. We allow them to, use the World Trade Organization and other venues to send stuff here. And we have got to get back to where, like we've been talking about, we have to manufacture here, because if the Chinese cross the Taiwan Strait tomorrow, the way of life will change. I promise you. And we have got to make sure that we have the manufacturing capacity and capability in the United States to ramp up production of weapon systems, because it will be a tremendous fight if we get into it. And so, we absolutely need to make sure that we're paying close attention. We're bringing back. I mean, I see it in southern West Virginia. We used to dig the coal that we burned to make the steel that made the buildings, that made the weapons. I mean, we used to do that. And we've got to get back to doing the same thing now with these critical minerals and rare earths, because they're the lifeblood of our society today. It's a digital society. That is the backbone of the digital society. And so we have got to make sure that we have the ability to continue to make and manufacture products here in the United States for that. And also think about the power demands on the highly technological systems that we now use in the military. The demands for power are tremendous. So we've got to be able, as we've been talking about, to have the battery systems, the generation systems to ensure that these highly advanced weapons can work, and that all those sensors that we're trying to put in our aircraft and in our ships and in our ground weapon systems all can communicate, because you have to have a clear picture of the entire battlefield. You can't have bits and pieces of the picture. You need to have for the most senior leaders to make decisions, you got to have the clear picture of the entire battlefield, so you don't end up going someplace that they want you to go. You're going to go where you need to go to defeat them.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So much of this is going to take a paradigm shift on behalf of policymakers in the U.S., where we're constantly elevating like consumer welfare above all other considerations. So under that paradigm and that approach, it was basically like, okay, well, as long as the consumer is paying the cheapest amount at the register, that's all that matters. But we're seeing, and you both gentlemen have pointed out in our research, me and Andrew, the research that we do at CPA points to the fact that there's these things that we're buying are anything but cheap, because they come at the cost of our manufacturing sector, of our national, national security, our now military preparedness, and all of these things. We're starting to see what that bill is coming due, and this is such a great point to talking about how we begin to reclaim those supply chains that we've simply just relinquished and squandered over to China. And I think that gives us an opportunity to talk about, the final segment of this show, like what is the administration doing and how are they, getting it right in this space. And this is where I think it would be a good opportunity to talk about an initiative recently that was announced, Project Vault. It's interesting, when we spoke, gentlemen, when we joined forces at the summit at CPA last month, we were talking about how the oil embargo, I think it was 1972 or 73, around that time, occasioned this build out of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and how Project Vault kind of came into that, is kind of set against the backdrop of a similar phenomenon happening. You fast forward a month later, here we are with almost the exact same situation happening, with all of this disruption in the Middle East and the war happening, and the implications for oil and energy markets, and the need for this kind of stockpile to happen. Let's talk a little bit about Project Vault. So this is one of the most significant, I think, developments in this space to come out for some time. The administration put $10 billion from the Export-Import Bank behind it, plus $2 billion in private capital. Clarios is the largest lead-acid battery manufacturer in the U.S. and also an RBC member. They're a signatory of this policy. Why don't you gentlemen talk about why this is such an important initiative?
Well, from the Project Vault thing, the thing that I think is interesting that the Trump administration, second Trump administration, is doing is they're It's a work between the corporate side and the government side. And so, like with Project Vault, you've got the investment, you've got the buy-in of the companies, and they're helping to fund a place for them to have these materials available in times of increased price or increased demand. And you've seen the government invest in like Mountain Pass, where they're putting money in to ensure that they can run, and there's a floor set on the price. Those are big deals for those companies, because you can't build a company's not going to go into something if they think they're going to lose money. And China has shown every time we try to start our manufacturing back that they're gonna dump it on the market, lower the price to make it to where they can't start doing that processing. So allowing there to be a floor set on the price for these allows them to understand they could make a profit off of it. And I think we're going to have to see a lot more of that. I think the tariff system that has been put in place, I think they've got to continue doing some of those things. Because as you said, I mean, and I've seen it all over the country, where you go into communities that used to be thriving communities, and you can't replace a car manufacturer with a Walmart. Nothing against Walmart, but again, they're not manufacturing anything. They're selling products, and you can't replace that manufacturing job with that service job and think that they're going to still have the same standard of living. And we've got to make sure that we're taking care of the American people. It's the America first mentality, but not only America. It's just America first. We have to take care of our citizens. That's why our elected officials are there. That's why the service members are there. You know, it's we the people that we defend in our Constitution. And we got to continue to remember we the people that's the American citizen that we're talking about and taking an oath to, not anybody else. It's we the people of the United States.
And Mihir, I would add to that excellent commentary by General Crane that and the Constitution is to ensure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So there's a generational piece to this as well. The drive to lower consumer prices is a somewhat selfish, or at least self-centered, generationally speaking, goal. And instead, a sustainable economy that goes out into the future is what should be our goal. And the tariff policies and and Project Vault, Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and the Maritime Action Plan for shipbuilding, they all come from a place of wanting sustainable capabilities that will support not just the current generation of Americans, but future generations as well. Project Vault, in addition to the price floor that General Crane discussed, also has in it some minimum offtake requirements, because the manufacturers need to know that there will be a certain amount that will be sold at that price floor, and that's what will generate capacity in the midpoints of the industry, and as well in the transportation sector, because again, the United States right now does not control maritime transportation of goods outside of the United States. Within the United States, we have some protections, but when it comes to global shipbuilding and shipping, the United States is down to about a 1% or less player. And so when we do ship overseas, we are placing our not only our goods, but our national security at risk. And the one other thing I'd say here is that there's a lot of talk in diplomatic circles about the rules-based international order, and in trade circles about global free trade. Both of those only work when all the players are literally playing from the same set of rules. But as we discussed, when China does not have, the Communist government of China and the companies it controls do not have to generate short-term profits as U.S. companies do, they have a lifetime advantage in terms of the ability to suffer low or lost profits in return for the long-term gain of grabbing market share. And so that's an imbalance and asymmetry in global trade that cannot be remedied just by a set of rules. I say frequently that the rules-based international order is the Maginot Line of the 21st century. It's a defensive system that only works if everybody agrees to it. China clearly does not agree to either the rules-based international order or the global free trade system as the West has understood it. And the current administration is now altering the rule set to make sure that America's interests and the American people are protected.
Yeah, I think if for anyone who wants to know about the rules-based trading order, look no further than China's $1.3 or $1.2 trillion trade surplus, which would never happen under a free trading system because currency would adjust in such a way that it would kind of prevent such a thing from even happening. Yet we still see China's currency continue to be undervalued, and they still have a hidden subsidy on their exports that they're able to just kind of dump their products onto the rest of the world. So, I think one other point I want to make is, one of the things we talk about in the report as far as what the administration or any administration could do is the 45X of the Inflation Reduction Act as a critical lever, which pays roughly 10% of the production cost for critical minerals processed domestically. And the credit phases out starting in, I think, 2030. And so we talk about why Congress needs to extend that. And maybe we can talk a little bit about why that's so important to kind of extend that incentive structure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the what that allows, again, is it gives them the ability to understand what prices are going to be, they're not going to lose money on investments, big investments to bring processing and manufacturing back to the United States. So for advanced manufacturing, 45X is a critical tool to help bring back onshore the manufacturing. You see a tremendous amount of investment being done back in the United States, and I think it's because of the number of the policies that the current administration has put in place through the tariff system, through looking at those countries and seeing are they following the rules, and when they're not, reimpose those tariffs, which I think is absolutely what we need to be doing. And so getting the 45X in place and allowing it to help bring back the manufacturing only helps to boost our economy. It gives the jobs to the people in the United States. We get back to taking care of we the people and not just a bottom line. And so I think that is, again, I think it has to be extended. We've got to continue to do what we can, just like China does right now. They give them zero interest loans or even they'll pay them to build more capacity, whether they need it or not. So we've got to be doing policies that give those incentives to bring the manufacturing back here. Otherwise, we're just going to continue to get more of the same.
Yeah, they've done such a good. Well, I shouldn't even say good because it makes it seem like I'm praising them. But like their strategy has been so successful at being able to benefit from not having to worry about profit, right? So then they're able to just simply flood markets and lower the price to such a point that it's unpalatable to do any investment in that sector, in the mining sector, which takes years of capital investment and time to lay those roots and those foundations. So by the time 10 years happens and they look around and they're the only players in town, for refining, for example, that's exactly the playbook happening. And so that's why I think we need these policies in place.
And like you said, I mean, China goes into these countries knowing they're going to make an unfair deal, knowing they're going to put that country in a debt burden. Mm-hmm. And so, those countries, I sure hope they're all really reading those contracts closely. I'm glad to see the State Department has routinely started to help them understand what it is that they're signing, because I think China's been pretty predatory in going into those countries so they can get what they need, and they're not worried about anything else except themselves, I promise you.
Well, so I think unless there's anything else you gentlemen wanted to add about any of those three segments, I wanted to maybe start to bring the conversation to a close, but I wanted to ask, either of you, if you could talk, if you could, if you had a policymaker, an influential policymaker in front of you right now, what is one big kind of takeaway from the report, or even really anything in general that you would like to impress upon them that you find is just so critical that they have to know?
For me,
go ahead, Admiral Brown.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Bill. I would say that the irregular warfare has begun. Just like in the Iran situation that we're going through now, the warfare there began 47 years ago. We only recognized it essentially within the past couple of weeks. But they were undermining purposefully the lives, the safety, the security of the United States, both militarily and economically, through both direct action and through proxy militias. China is doing the exact same thing, a slightly different set of tactics. They are at economic war with the United States, what they declared several decades ago. They're at chemical war with the United States in terms of fentanyl manufacture, killing hundreds of thousands of Americans and siphoning billions of dollars out of our economy. And they're in this trade war with the United States where they are seeking to capture, but not quite kill, I believe, U.S. economic dominance. They are, in my opinion, treating us as a host where they are the parasite. They don't want to kill us off. They want to feed off of us and weaken us to the point that we can't fight back or disentangle ourselves from that relationship. And the one other thing that I wanted to add here, this is specifically about the Responsible Battery Coalition and the team of companies and that 99+% recycling rate. From an environmental standpoint, U.S. Manufacturing and processing is absolutely superior from a global environmental standpoint to what China does or what its companies do in countries that don't have the same environmental and labor protections that we have. And then the other part is that this industry is particularly innovative, the Responsible Battery Coalition members, in turning what had been a waste stream into a critical input. That recycling rate took what had been a waste stream and now very carefully and cleanly controls it to make it an input in this circular manufacturing and remanufacturing part of the industry. So it's a really innovative company or company set business line that I think our government needs to support. And when we're talking about 45X, the extension is so important because this is not a one administration solution to the problem. This is going to be a generational solution to this problem to ensure that America is safe, prosperous, and secure for generations to come.
Yeah, I think Kevin Brown made some great points there. And just to follow up with that one piece of that, when you move manufacturing from the United States and you move it to, say, India, China, if you're worried about global warming and you think that's a big issue, well, you're pushing manufacturing to a place that burns a much less clean coal. They're producing energy using way dirtier technology than what we do. And so again, if you're worried about the global warming, you're worried about what the world looks like, keeping that here, keeping the clean energy that's going into manufacturing is really, really important. And going back to the CPA and the Responsible Battery Coalition, when we went to Florida and held a conference, the thing that I took away from that, and I cannot ever get it out of my head, there's two companies that I remember, or a company and an association, and that was the Rearware, number one, oldest company in the United States. Imagine if we lost that copper manufacturer. It would just be a travesty to me because it was one of the founding folks of this country. And then the second one that I took to heart was the cabinet manufacturers. You're talking about little tiny businesses around this country manufacturing cabinetry. And if you allow China to dump their cheap stuff into this country, you're putting all those people out of work and you're forcing them to have to go and migrate someplace else so they can have a job and take care of their families. And so, I think the key takeaway to me is we've got to put the wall up or make the wall a little higher. So they got to climb a little higher to get over it. And that makes sure that we can keep our folks working, our folks safe, and continue to have the generational change that's going to be required to make sure that my grandkids and my grandkids' grandkids have the lifestyle that I've been accustomed to and that the American population has grown accustomed to.
Fantastic. Well, this has been a fantastic show. I got to be honest, I was really looking forward to catching up with you guys again after, last month we had such a great experience on the panel and heard great things about, the conversation that we had. I think it really resonated with the audience, and hopefully folks who are listening have the same experience and get a chance to read the report, put a lot of work into it, and we're really proud of it. I don't have a whole lot more to add here, guys. I think we can probably wrap up here. Andrew, I apologize. I know I took up a lot of talking time, but, we've referenced a lot of research that you've been doing as well. So if there's any concluding thoughts you had, I want to turn it over to you real quick before we wrap up for the show.
No, I think that it's been a great report, and I think it does a really good job of just analyzing and separating out all the different aspects of the supply chain and separating out how the mining side is very different than the processing side. And you really need a whole of supply chain approach to all of this. And I think it does a good job of really outlining all the steps needed for all of those different measures to make sure we're building things here at home and how that applies to national security and just being ready in case of any conflict that comes around.
Perfect. All right, well, gentlemen, I think we can stop there for this week. Thank you both again for joining us. To you, the viewer, the listener at home, we want to thank you for joining in to this special podcast, this special episode, I should say, of The Big Three at CPA TV. Till next week, take care.